Alright, you degens, Kafka trailer just dropped, and goddamn, she is beautiful and exactly what I wanted. I've been starving, waiting for days for this trailer to drop, and we gotta hurry up with this, so let's get this started. This video is gonna be short. Short, am I kidding? Listen, you see the rest of my videos, think this one's gonna be short? It's not gonna be short. We're talking about Kafka here. So, what do we know about Kafka? Let's talk about her a bit, really. She's a Lightning and Hildy based character and a 5-star at that. You wanna know what that means? You're gonna lose the 50-50, we all will, don't worry about it. If you didn't, you're a liar, shut up, no one likes you. On top of that, she has a base speed of 100, that's very important, keep that in mind. What else you should know about Kafka? She's a dot-based character. That means Serval, goodbye. We're not talking about Serval anymore. She's garbage. I'll get to why Serval is garbage in a bit. Kafka, why is she great? She applies dots, she refreshes her dots, she acts as a detonator for the rest of your dots that have been applied. What do I mean by detonator? If there are already dots on that target, Kafka can then detonate those dots, meaning she could trigger them for a massive burst of damage. This is core to Kafka's kit, as you'll also see later on. Speaking of her kit, let's just talk about it, I guess. Starting off, her basic attack, no one cares. Truly, no one cares. I'm not even kidding with you. When it comes to her skill, that's where we start looking, right? Aside from the initial damage that her skill has, we're going to ignore that. That's not the important part. The important part about Kafka's skill is that if the target is currently receiving dot damage, that means that all dots placed currently on the target, they will immediately get popped for 60% of their original damage, right? That's just at level 1. I'm reading all these at level 1. Essentially, what this means is, if that enemy has a dot on them, you use Kafka's skill, boom, she pops that current dot on them and deals 60% of that damage to them. Fantastic. Second thing that is really important with Kafka, and I cannot stress this enough, her ultimate. Her ultimate is what you need to be using with Kafka. Why do I say that? She then inflicts shock to the enemy, right? But the important part is while shocked, enemies receive a lightning dot, which is the same thing as shock, blah, 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 equal to 150% of her attack at the beginning of each turn. So, what does this mean? Why are these two important in conjunction? You then use her ultimate, you apply shock, you then pop them, right? At the beginning of the turn, they deal damage. You then use her skill. What does her skill do? Pop all dots that are currently placed. 2 instances of dot damage is happening at this moment. Now, Kafka has a trace that is really important, that when her ultimate is used, enemy targets will now receive damage immediately from all currently applied dot sources instead of just the shock. So, do you know what that means? If we have bleed, fire, wind share, right, on the enemy, we then use Kafka's ultimate, they will be inflicted with shock, but those 3 dots prior will then get popped, and they will take that instance of damage on top of taking it again when their turn rolls around. So much damage is going to be applied through dots with Kafka. She is the core to a dot-centric team. She is your magnum opus, if you will. We are now going to go on to her talent, which doesn't really matter. The first part of it doesn't matter because what? The first part just deals damage, no one cares. But the second part refreshes her dot from her ultimate, right? But it can also apply to it. So all you're really doing is just refreshing and applying her ultimate dot. The second part, which is the one where enemies receive lightning dot damage, equal to 115% of her attack. So if we are now going to go on to her traces and talk about which one should we level up, the ideal format for Kafka would be leaving her basic attack at 1, because we aren't going to be basic attacking with Kafka at all. Let's get that out the way right now. Let's be for real, guys. We're not doing that. Her skill and ultimate are her breadwinners and core to her kit and her rotation and her combo. You want her skill and ultimate to be at least level 8 or above. That is where you want. Kafka whole damage from her kit comes from these two, so it's really important that we have these leveled as high as we can go. Her talent, you can leave it at a comfortable level of level 6, and that's perfectly fine. Because remember, the main thing we're going for is for the second sentence, where it just inflicts her dot. We're not going to be dealing a lot of damage from her follow-up anyways, and you really shouldn't be worrying about that. Something else that I should talk about is her traces, actually. We briefly talked about one, which is Torture, the one that allows dots to be popped through her ultimate. She has another one, which is Plunder, which when she defeats a shocked enemy, she regenerates 5 energy, which is fine. Thorns, if we then move on to Thorns, which is when her ultimate technique or follow-up attack is triggered, there's a 30% increased chance to inflict shock, which is perfectly fine, right? Having more effective rate? Who cares? Forget about it. That's actually pretty good. Now, let's talk about her Eidolons real quick. Eidolon 2 is where you want to stop at. Anything above doesn't really matter. For those that want to whale, sure, Eidolon 6. But those that want to, be a little bit of dolphins, you can go to Eidolon 2. 2 is the real sweet spot with her, because when she's on the field, the dot damage by all allies increased by 25%. That's going to come in handy when she's paired up with other dot characters. Remember, Kafka is your core to your dot team. If you run that dot team, you are running Kafka. No ifs, ands, or buts. I don't want to hear it. Because if you aren't, you're doing it wrong, and that's a fact. Now, speaking of teams, what characters can we run with Kafka to help out with her dots? Now, as you guys know, Ice, Quantum, and Imaginary are not dots, correct? So, the dots that we can then use is Bleed, Fire, Lightning, and Wind. This is correct, but out of those 4 dots, which are the ones that we should really be paying attention to? The 2 that we should really be focusing on is, of course, Physical and Fire. The reason being is Physical is the strongest dot in the game, followed by Fire. Of course, Lightning and Wind Shear are good dots as well, but if we were to maximize it, we would want Physical. Currently, we don't have a Fire Nihility based character, and the best option that we have out of the characters that are available in the game currently would be Wind and Physical. So we must make do with what we have. But if we were to go back and talk about Kafka briefly, what should we do about Kafka and her relics? Let's finish that up. With relics, you of course want to run the 4-piece Thunder set, but there are 2 paths you can follow for Kafka if you want. One of them being is in regards to her boots. Do you want speed boots or attack boots? I would recommend the attack boots and you go for her light cone. With this, you would need speed substats, correct? So, you would want to have at least 134 speed. From her light cone, she then gives 14.4 speed when it's triggered up to 3 times, because you will be constantly attacking with Kafka. So, how much speed do you need after that in order to make up the rest? In order to make up the rest, you need 14.6 speed, and you can get that through speed substats. That is if you want to go for the 134 speed route to make Kafka, go zoom zoom and make her attack more. But that can be kind of an issue if we really stop and look at it. Now, the other build would of course just be running regular speed boots, but let's get back to the problem I was just talking about. So, you know how people like to say you must go for 134, this and that in terms of speed? Yeah, let's not do that real quick. Let's stop and think about this for a second. If Kafka is our detonator, right, and we need other dots applied, that means she has to be somewhat slow, if that makes sense, guys. So, let's say we have Locha, Luca, and Locha, Luca, Sampo, and Kafka on a team, right? It doesn't really matter when Locha goes, because it doesn't really matter, to be honest with you. But Luca and Sampo have to go before before Kafka, right? So the reason being is you want to have their dots applied first, and then Kafka will then use her skill or ultimate to then detonate them and deal the extra damage. If we're looking to maximize Kafka's Kafka's use and effectiveness on a team, then we need her to be somewhat slow, if that makes sense. Like, she has to be slower than the rest of your other dot characters, so you have to keep that in mind. Even if you get Kafka to 134 speed, Luca would have to be at like 136 speed, 135. Luca just has to be faster, right? And that's another thing. If you have enough speed substats and you then have her light cone, that can be an issue, because remember, if you want to maximize and use Kafka effectively, he has to be a little bit slower. So you need to be careful when using characters like Bronya and Asta on your team. But this is also where the depth comes in with Kafka in terms of speed management. You have to really, really think and build a team around her. Speaking of builds and stuff, some people have been debating in the community, should you go crit or attack, or should you go energy regen? And to be frank with you, if we look at Kafka's stats and her energy regen and how much her ult cost, she can, what? With energy regen, she should be able to get her ult back in about 2.5 attacks, something like that. But without energy regen, it will take her 3. So if you break it down, it's not really worth it to run the energy regen, and you should focus more on applying your dots. So an attack-based rope would be better with a lightning damage spear in order to help out Kafka. In terms of crit versus attack, you don't want to run crit on her, or crit rate, crit damage, because that only applies to the initial hit of her skill, her ultimate, and her talent, right? So what you would want to do is maximize attack and speed for your substats and for your main stats. That being is because Kafka always needs speed, and she always needs an attack increase, which will then further help with her dots. Crit does not do that. You cannot crit with dots, therefore crit is useless on Kafka. Do not build crit on Kafka, just trust me on that. It's not going to really help you out too much. It'll even help you out at all, to be frank with you. But yeah, in terms of speed with Kafka, it always comes down to you. 134 should be the bare minimum, with upwards up to 160 and 150 plus being the perfect sweet spot for her. Ideally 160, just so she can go twice on turn 1. Now, another thing you should know about Kafka is you will need at least 11.2 in terms of effect hit rate from substats in order to make sure her dots land 100% and effectively. Just keep that in mind. You need at least 11.2 from her substats and effect hit rate. Now, moving on to what you guys really want to know. What characters can we run with Kafka? Let's be real here. We're not running Serval. Serval is an erudition unit. And on top of that, she's not really a strong dot-based character. Her damage really isn't there. She's not that good, and you will be replacing her with Kafka anyways. Sampo comes second on the list if I was to do a ranking for them. Sampo is not that good. I'm going to be frank with you. Yeah, Sampo is not that good. If we're going to break down Sampo, he's like the second strongest out of the characters we have so far. The issue is when you're using Sampo, you're also competing with Kafka, and you don't want that, because Sampo is going to be using a lot of skill points and his ult a lot. You need a lot of skill points in order to use his ult to then gain the whole dot damage increase passive that he gets from his ult, which is great, but it's taken away from Kafka, and Kafka needs the skill points. He needs the skill points, and you don't want a basic attack with him, because the effect hit rate and the chance on that isn't that good, and you want to apply the wind shear every turn, and it's not really going to work out with Sampo. It's not looking that good, if we're going to be honest here. And Luca being my first pick would make much more sense, because Luca is flat out better. He's a basic attacker, so skill points are going to be spared. You won't be using his skill as much, and on top of that, his ult is better than Sampo's. Not only does it last for one more turn, but it also increases all damage received. So it's better than just having dots damage increased. He increases all damage received, and that is a huge stipulation and a huge difference between these two characters that you need to keep in mind and realize. But That's the ranking for the dot characters. What about support characters? I would make the argument that a E5, E6 Asta is exactly what Kafka needs and what other dot characters need. Because if we're running Kafka, Luca, Asta provides an attack buff and a speed buff to these characters, which is what they need to continuously do more actions and continuously dish out more dots, more damage, and yada yada yada. On top of that, Asta has a small bonus effect where her basic attack also acts as a dot, but it's just a small bonus, right? And it's a fire dot, and we all know fire is the second best dot damage element in the game, so just think of it as a small bonus for bringing along Asta. Point is, Asta would be the best support option for Kafka and the dot focused team, simply because, you know, she provides 3 things that they need: a dot, an attack buff, and a speed buff. Now, something to keep in mind is, is this going to be really expensive to build into this dot team? Now, if we're going to talk about, is Kafka's team too expensive to build? I would truthfully say no, it's not that expensive to build. Let's look at a team like Seele's, right? You want Seele, Bronya, you want a 5-star healer, and then you want another support to help boost her, right? Those are like 3 5-stars right there. If we're looking at Kafka's team, a dot team is really inexpensive to build because all you need is Kafka, the 1 5-star, and the other 4-stars that are perfectly viable and usable for her. You don't even need Locha, you don't even need Bailu. You can slot in Natasha, Luca, and Asta, and you can simply have a great team right there. Building a team for Kafka is truly inexpensive, and the net gain you get from it is quite high. Speaking of the net gain, people say that Kafka is weak and her damage is this and this and this. As a solo character, even as a sub DPS, Kafka is extremely solid as a solo DPS character, right? As a sub DPS character, I think people are really underestimating what Kafka can do, and it's a little bit shocking because I've heard these same opinions about Blade, and we all know how Blade turned out, right? Blade is the second best sub DPS in the game, only by a small margin of like less than 10% compared to Seele. No, actually, in terms of sub DPS, he is better than Seele, but of course, in terms of single unit fights, Seele is alright better. But yeah, to say that Kafka isn't as good, I think that's a little bit ludicrous, and people need to really, I guess, stop underestimating what these percentages mean and what these characters can do. I know dot is a new playstyle, but if we're going to be real, guys, let's honestly be real. Yes, Kafka is going to be really good. It's a playstyle that is a little bit slower, but it produces quite a lot of damage, and I'm sure that we're going to be seeing a lot of results with Kafka in like the next week when people get to play with her and test her out some more. So just hold on to your hats and you'll see some more videos. Even I will do some videos about it as well, because Kafka and Blade were characters that I was really excited for. Now that they're here, oh my god, holy crap, let's go guys, let's go. But that was it for my little Kafka video slash guide, or whatever you want to call it. It was essentially me rambling on about some stuff about Kafka that I think people should really know about her, and I don't see a lot of people talking about it for whatever reason, and the people that I do see talking about it, they aren't really showing off too much, like not even showing off, just talking about some of the information about her that's like actually needed, right? Like in terms of like relic sets, what should you do? Oh yeah, probably should have mentioned that. In terms of like the planar set, of course, just a herder station, just lightning and attack rope. There's not much to it really. Focus on attack and speeds up stats. Kafka really is a dot character. You shouldn't build her like anything else. If you are, then I mean, doing it wrong, but alright, that's perfectly fine. You can play her how you want to play her. Just know it's not that optimal. I'm really excited for Kafka, guys. I'm sorry. I strictly just love Kafka. She's a fantastic character. I love her. She's beautiful. I saw her. She had the guns. I wish she had more guns. to be honest with you, but it's whatever. I just don't like her sword, her katana. I just wish it was another gun. I wish it was like her grenades. It was something, just not the katana, but sure. You know. What do you guys think of that trailer? I was up at like 1 in the morning, a little bit before midnight, thirsty. My throat was dry, and I was waiting. I was waiting for that trailer to drop. And when it dropped, I felt alive in that moment. I felt joy for the first time in years. I can't wait for tomorrow. I'm gonna roll. I'm gonna lose the 50-50, and I'm gonna cry. But anyways, catch you guys later in the next video. Expect this week and next week to be more Kafka videos. Peace.